The story opened with the protagonist being thrown out of his job. The boss dismissed him coldly, declaring him unfit for the position and cutting him off without hesitation. Disoriented, he accepted it and left, only to overhear the staff outside. They spoke of how he once attended the same school as the company's owner, yet while the owner controlled an empire, he was being tossed aside like trash. Betrayal had already cut deep when his girlfriend left him, and now this was the final blow. Someone even mocked that it was absurd he'd ever been given a position in the first place. Head lowered, he carried the weight of defeat. This had been his last chance. Helping others, caring too much, living as a good man, those ideals had carved his downfall. Kindness left him branded as weak, and weakness led him here, a failure. The scene shifted to the subway. The endless cycle of a model citizen consumed him. Rise early, ride the train, work until drained, then collapse back home. Standing in the crowded car, he wondered if it would be better if everything simply ended. As the train approached, the thought of throwing it all away hovered dangerously close. Then the lights vanished. Darkness swept across the train. At first, it seemed like a blackout, but he quickly realized it was something else. A system interface appeared before his eyes. Beginner package. Use all your points to fulfill a wish. A manga addict, he recognized this mechanic instantly. If this was real, then there was only one wish worth making: to return to the start, to rewrite everything, to live as someone strong and successful instead of the pathetic man he had become. When his eyes opened again, the train was still there, but something was wrong. He was younger. Panic and awe collided. Had he really gone back in time? His gaze shifted, and beside him sat a girl who stunned him, Yanfei, the school goddess. She looked radiant just as he remembered, yet seeing her so close made him freeze. The memory rushed back. August 30th, 2013. That day. The mistakes, the humiliation, the arrogance of others. He had lived it all once already. Back then, he had played the fool, chasing words and cheap lines, making himself a nuisance. He had leaned in too close, acted like fate was on his side, only to be branded a pervert and shoved aside by Xiao Gang, the protective shadow who stood at Yanfei's side. That shame replayed itself vividly as he reached for a cup of instant noodles, his cheap comfort food. Xiao Gang mocked him for it, sneering at his poverty. The old version of him would have snapped, would have fought back, desperate to defend his pride. But not this time. He stayed quiet, chewing through the noodles, his mind steady. And just then, the system reawakened. He opened his status window and stared at the strange display. Bars for knowledge, appearance, and other attributes glowed before him, exposing the truth of who he had been back then. Pathetic, weak, and lacking in every possible way. The system urged him to invest points, to spend money in order to strengthen his skills. One detail caught his eye: 2 identical maneuver skills, the second embarrassingly tied to self-pleasure. He dismissed it without care. What mattered now was clear. With this system, he could build the life he had always craved. He would no longer crawl through existence as a failure. He would become ruthless, unstoppable. The next morning, the same dull routine returned. The smell of reheated noodles lingered. Money. That was the real problem. Spending it wasn't difficult, but acquiring it was. He needed a plan to earn, fast. Back in his seat, he watched Xiaogang drape himself over Yanfei, trying to impress her with empty promises of fancy meals. She brushed him off, preferring simple noodles instead. When he leaned in to peek at her phone, she shoved him back with sharp irritation. The rejection stung, but the sight of it made the protagonist smirk. The jealous boyfriend caught the laugh and snapped, demanding to know if he was mocking him. The protagonist brushed it aside, but the fool pushed harder, claiming his status as her boyfriend as if it were a shield. Yanfei had no patience for it. She demanded to eat in peace. To the protagonist, Xiaogang was exactly as he remembered, a worthless simp who would never change. Minutes later, their noodles were gone. Yanfei slipped out to buy a snack, only to return disappointed. Everything had sold out. That was when the protagonist reached into his pocket and produced chicken drumsticks. She was surprised, asking the price and offering to pay. He quoted $2, $50, and when she handed him $3, he returned the favor with an orange, calling it even for the 50-cent difference. She smiled at the gesture, soft and radiant, her charm pulling him in like a tide. But the moment shattered when Xiaogang stormed back in, furious at her acceptance of food from another man. He shouted, demanding to know why she would eat from someone else when he had money to spare. The confrontation escalated until Yanfei finally snapped. Standing tall in front of everyone, she declared her disgust, rejecting him outright. The entire carriage turned to watch as she stormed away, leaving him in humiliation. Enraged, Xiao Gang turned on the protagonist. His hand clenched the boy's collar, ripping him from his seat and slamming him to the ground. Blood sprayed from the impact. Weak, fragile, he hadn't expected his body to crumble this easily. A kick was already aimed at him, rage fueling the attack. But instead of fear, the protagonist felt clarity. He pushed himself up with trembling arms, a thought burning in his mind. The question of his first source of income was answered. This fool would be his benefactor. The scene cut forward. Yanfei's worried voice rang as the doctor explained the aftermath. Reflexes gone, brain damage severe, the boy lay unconscious. A coma had swallowed Xiaogang whole. The absurdity of it lingered. Had he fallen into it like a master of acting? No, the truth was harsher. His skull had taken brutal damage, and immediate hospitalization was the only option. The protagonist reflected on what had happened. Xiaogang had thrown him down, screamed that it was all his fault, claimed he had been humiliated because of him. Violence was the only language that fool understood. Now the tables had turned, and the cost had been paid. The protagonist stared at his attacker with a mocking smile, calling him worthless in his thoughts, and even thanking him for the conversation he had managed to squeeze out of Yanfei. That sarcasm only earned him another brutal punch. The train car erupted, passengers rushing to restrain the raging fool, shouting for him to stop. Yet the blows kept coming, fists raining down on the protagonist's face. Then Yanfei appeared, pushing through the chaos. Her voice cut through the noise, demanding to know what was happening. Panicked, Xiaogang stammered apologies, but when his victim turned to him with bloodied lips and a twisted smile, calling him trash without a word spoken, the humiliation was unbearable. Yanfei shoved the fool aside and rushed to the beaten boy. He could barely mutter that he was feeling awful before collapsing in her arms. She screamed for a doctor. The so-called boyfriend tried to defend himself when the police boarded, babbling that the protagonist had faked everything, that it was all an act. But the entire train turned against him. Witnesses shouted the truth. He had snapped simply because another man spoke to his girlfriend. Yanfei's guilt deepened, blaming herself for dragging the protagonist into this mess. Xiaogang, cornered, pleaded for her support. He begged, reaching for her, but she tore her hand free in disgust. Desperate, he claimed he would call his father. On the line, his cries spilled the entire story, his voice shaking with panic. Meanwhile, the protagonist stirred back to consciousness. Pain shot through his mouth, blood trickling down his face. Yanfei hovered over him, anxious, asking about his injuries. His nose was a mess, one tooth gone, but all he could do was marvel silently at her beauty. To him, she wasn't just a classmate, she was a goddess incarnate. She insisted on taking him to the hospital. He played it down, though inside he was already plotting to turn the injuries into compensation. Leaving the hospital later, he embraced her tightly, praising her kindness and beauty with the fervor of someone struck by divine presence. She admitted she hadn't even realized they were from the same school, though now she understood why he seemed so familiar. Overwhelmed, he stumbled, proclaiming it an honor that she remembered him at all. Yanfei could only mutter awkwardly at his persistence, surprised he could still compliment her in such a state. He grinned through the swelling and missing tooth, already calculating. The thought struck him clearly. Next time, he'd train harder. Taking a beating alone was nothing. If it meant climbing higher, he could endure it. The thought haunted him. What if next time the situation was about protecting someone and he failed? He told himself he had to be stronger, harder. Yanfei agreed with his resolve, though she reminded him he needed to at least learn how to defend himself. In his mind, Xiaogang had already gotten what he deserved. Now the fool would spend a day or two locked up. Losing a tooth had turned the fight into a criminal case. That's how life worked. Anyone walking by the river eventually got their feet wet. The hospital treated him like royalty. A nurse informed him he had been given a private room with the best medicine and care money could buy. He thanked her, but suspicion lingered. Who was spending so much on him? Most likely Xiaogang's family. Checking his system, he saw his balance jump. 20,000 points in assets. Even though he hadn't paid for the transport or hospital, the system still counted it as his personal expenses. Luxury life had never looked so good. The door opened, and Yanfei stepped in again, cheerful, returning his glasses. Just that small gesture had him imagining marriage already. He slid them back on, taking in her curves, her charm, her personality. She knew what mattered. He couldn't help but think he should even thank Xiaogang for delivering this chance to him. Yanfei mentioned her father would be arriving soon and suggested exchanging numbers to keep in touch. Of course, he agreed without hesitation. Her family arrived shortly after. She greeted her father with joy, but the one who stood out was the stern man who introduced himself as Xiaogang's father. The old man admitted his failure in raising his son. Both he and his wife had come to apologize, her face red with embarrassment as she admitted to spoiling the boy far too much. The father urged the protagonist not to move, to rest, promising full compensation. Awkwardly, the protagonist downplayed it, saying he was at fault too. After all, he had cursed the boy. Even if he'd been punched, kicked, had his tooth broken, nose smashed, and body stomped. The old man insisted compensation was the only way to settle things. The offer was staggering, 800,000 yuan. The number echoed in his head. How many attribute points could he buy with that? The father grew uneasy at the lack of reaction, wondering if the boy wanted even more. He knew the truth. His son's career could crumble if the incident were reported, so he was desperate to keep things quiet. The protagonist finally accepted, calling the amount more than fair. Now he understood why Yanfei often mentioned having such a cool uncle, but the nervous father still worried. If this all ended with money, it would prove he cared more about paying debts than raising his son properly. The protagonist pressed the issue, insisting that the spoiled son needed to understand his actions were wrong, otherwise he would destroy his own future. It was almost absurd. Even while accepting money, he still dared to lecture about morals. The father, reluctant and embarrassed, gave in, promising he would teach his son properly. But the protagonist wasn't finished. He kept pushing, pretending he didn't care about the money at all, declaring he only wanted the boy to realize how his behavior would damage not just himself, but his entire family. The old man broke down, tears forming, admitting defeat. He swore that once his son was released, he would bring him back to apologize in person. But Yanfei stepped in, telling them it was enough, and soon they both left. The hallway was crowded as families parted ways. Xiaogang's father offered another apology to Yanfei's father, who brushed it aside with forced calm. At least now, he said, they could have a chance to talk sense into the boy. With that, everyone dispersed. Outside, Yanfei's father noticed his daughter's expression. Something lingered in her eyes. When he asked, she admitted her anger. Xiaogang had been a fool for everything he did. At least it was over, her father replied. At least the boy would vanish from her life. She agreed, relieved, even grateful that it ended this way. She confessed that if Xiaogang had possessed the maturity of the boy he attacked, none of this would have happened. Her father raised an eyebrow. She seemed to hold the protagonist in high regard. When he pressed, she explained with a blush that they were from the same school. She only felt guilty because he got beaten up because of her, and she thought he seemed like an easygoing type. Curious, she asked what her father thought of him. He admitted the boy gave off the air of someone responsible and mature, but he added a warning. Boys who grow up like that usually endure great hardship. They focus on success above all else, not emotions. They might achieve great futures, but they're not always ready for relationships. His daughter listened quietly as he reminded her that love could be exhausting and she should be careful. She reassured him that she wasn't interested in dating anyway. Meanwhile, the protagonist was celebrating. The system displayed 387,000 points sitting in his account. A double victory. The fool had paid out, and the system rewarded him for it. He collapsed onto the hospital bed grinning, wondering what to do next. His hand touched his glasses, and he remembered his missing tooth. Could the system fix that too? A memory resurfaced from his past life. The mockery, the ridicule over his appearance. He tested it, asking the system if it could repair him. The interface flared like a scene out of The Matrix. When he opened his eyes again, everything felt clear, sharp. His status read, healthy. He rushed to the mirror, pulled off his glasses, and stared. This was him, his vision restored, his face transformed. His eyes, mirrors of the soul, now shone with clarity. As an old saying echoed in his mind, eyes with beauty hold depth, light, and charm. And with just this one change, his attractiveness had already climbed by 3 points. Unstoppable. That's how he felt now. The system made it clear. One function influenced the others. While reflecting on this, a message came from Yanfei. She thanked him for his help, inviting him to meet at the Confucius Temple for food. He refused, reminding her he was still toothless, and asked her to bring a book instead. She laughed it off, apologizing for forgetting, and promised to bring one later. Both seemed oddly happy with this exchange. The protagonist, relentless as always, slipped in another playful remark, certain that if he were by her side, she wouldn't even have time to finish her meal. Unstoppable. Her father, watching from the sidelines, couldn't help but notice how brightly his daughter was smiling. The next day, she kept her promise and handed him a book. It was impossibly dense and boring. He frowned, questioning her choice. With a smirk, she revealed the joke and replaced it with a copy of Soul of Leveling. He stared at the cover with relief, telling himself she understood him better than anyone. She winked, urging him to recover soon. Then she leaned closer without warning, making him step back. She teased that removing his glasses had completely transformed his appearance. He had already been convinced of that himself, but hearing it made him puff up with confidence. He declared that this was just the beginning, that he would keep improving until he was far more handsome. She laughed at his cockiness, joking that maybe the glasses were nothing more than a seal locking away his beauty. If that was true, she added, he should never wear them again. Finally, she warned him to be ready. Tomorrow, she would be bringing her father. That next day brought an unexpected visitor. Xiao Gang stood there, visibly shaken, apologizing. He admitted he had lost control and begged forgiveness. Even his parents, watching, were moved. The protagonist accepted, remarking that they clearly loved their son and he shouldn't worry them like that again. Xiao Gang grit his teeth, annoyed. Was this guy really trying to preach morals at him? Not long after, a lawyer arrived, documents in hand. The compensation was finalized. 800,000 yuan. The old man presented the check with a warning, hoping such trouble would never repeat. The protagonist thanked him, inwardly amazed. Between the hospital bills, the room, the trip, and now the payout, Xiao Gang's family had spent a total of 1.15 million. His system balance swelled, points overflowing. Now came the real dilemma: how to use them. Attributes could skyrocket, but he couldn't dump everything into stats. He still needed real-world money for survival. Lying on the hospital bed, he even entertained the thought of not spending it all, of simply buying a small, comfortable house and living the rest of his life off instant noodles. That was when Yanfei and her father returned, checking in on him. The girl seemed more radiant each time he saw her. Her father reminded him to rest, mentioning they would be traveling soon, and handed him a bundle of cash as a gift. He explained that since the incident had involved his daughter too, it felt right to compensate him further. But this time, the protagonist refused. He insisted he didn't want it. Yanfei had been a victim in this just as much as him. Taking money tied to her felt wrong. The man clapped a hand on the protagonist's shoulder, praising him as a prodigy among young men and urging him to visit their home someday. He even asked him to look after Yanfei since their universities were close. Embarrassed, Yanfei begged her father not to say such things. The protagonist admitted he really did attend her university, which made her light up with excitement, until he clarified that his field was the humanities, an area that rarely earned recognition. The room fell into awkward silence. To break it, he told a story. When he was younger, he dismissed academics, walked the wrong path, and paid the price. But from those mistakes, he had learned one lesson. In college, he would push himself to be better. Father and daughter listened quietly as he declared his determination. The older man agreed, reminding him that the past meant nothing compared to the direction he was heading now. Curious, he asked what the boy would do with the money he had received. Would he start a business? The protagonist smirked, claiming that one day he'd become an entrepreneur and sell courses on how to earn 800,000. Amused, the father congratulated him and prepared to leave. Before he walked out, the protagonist stopped him, insisting that he was an extraordinary father, someone worth remembering even 20 years later. The compliment landed hard. The father thanked him and left, Yanfei following soon after, smiling with relief. Now the protagonist turned his focus inward. He called the nurse and demanded to be discharged. The time for recovery was over. It was time to grow rapidly. He already knew the future. Within 2 years, real estate prices would skyrocket, and anyone who seized the chance would become a billionaire. He boarded a bus toward the city of dreams, stepped into a real estate agency, pulled out his black card, and demanded properties in the school district, 40 to 60 square meters, built within the last 2 years. The consultant recommended one with a solid price. Without hesitation, the self-proclaimed king of negotiation pointed at it. His parents had once dreamed of owning a house, and here he was in his 20s, buying not just one but two, planning to rent them out to cover his living costs. This was capitalism at its weakest yet cleverest form. The same boy who once splurged on a deluxe presidential suite with his first 100,000 now stood on the threshold of a new life, ecstatic that his restart had truly begun. Then reality struck. He was still missing a tooth. Opening the system, he commanded a restoration. The interface rejected him. The tooth's cost exceeded his current capabilities. To unlock it, he needed upgrades, at least 3 level 3 skills. First step, reach level 2. He poured his abundant points into the system, and his body lit with power. Suddenly, his thoughts sharpened, accelerating like a machine. Ideas flooded him, so many that he collapsed from the weight of it all. When he rose again, head pounding, he realized what the system had given him: knowledge. Accounting, finance, marketing, skills that revealed wisdom wasn't just about thought, but about storing and wielding vast amounts of information. One step unlocked the next, and with each level, his status climbed closer to the elite. Just as he was basking in the progress, his phone rang. The voice on the other end reminded him that his 15-day leave was over, and today was the last day. If he didn't return, he'd repeat the year. He tried to stall, claiming he wasn't fully recovered, but the truth was clear: time was up. Checking the system again, his excitement dimmed. Raising attributes from 70 to 79 demanded 200,000 points per level. Worse, pushing them to the 5th level required 10 million. No chance of maxing anything out yet. But there was a silver lining. A new function had appeared. Every time he spent money, there was now a chance of receiving bonus items tied to his purchases, delivered straight into his inventory. Soon after, he was back on campus. Eyes followed him the moment he stepped in. Girls whispered. Tall, sharp features, unfamiliar. Was he a transfer student? The truth was simpler. He had used the system to fine-tune his looks, lifting his nose, adjusting his jawline, balancing details here and there. The result, flawless. E-girls practically lost their minds. He headed straight for the principal's office to sort things out. Explaining his hospital stay, he produced the certificate as proof. The principal pressed him for documents and payment. He complied, though he knew this man was far from honest. Still, he wasn't sharp enough to be dangerous, easy to handle. Asking about his dorm, he was told it would be noisy and lively. That wouldn't do. He slid over a medical recommendation stating he needed peace and quiet. The principal frowned, then agreed to arrange a smaller room, 4 people maximum, but with higher fees. That didn't matter. In his past life, he'd been stuck in the madhouse that was Dormitory 5, surrounded by lunatics. This time he had the black card. No more nightmares. Elsewhere, Yanfei received his message saying he'd arrived safely. They exchanged a few casual lines, nothing serious. Meanwhile, he stared at his system, imagining his mother's face when she saw his transformation. Only one problem: his balance had dropped to 40,000. Survival came first. At the very least, he needed food. After grabbing a bite at the campus store, he noticed a street vendor hawking books. Curiosity pulled him closer. On the ground lay a tattered volume labeled Manual of Life, 66 Ways to Change Yourself. Price tag, 168 yuan. Too steep. He pushed for a discount. The man sighed and dropped it to 100. In truth, what he was selling wasn't wisdom at all, just the same garbage e-girls sold online for 99 cents, only printed and bound. The system triggered at once. The purchase of a so-called life manual set activated the gift function, and a book materialized in front of him. A plain scripture, yet promised that reading it sincerely would slightly raise his intelligence. For the protagonist, this was a win. Upgrading attributes cost a fortune, so anything free was gold. The chubby vendor asked if he was fine, but soon the scene shifted. He was stepping into a classroom. Eyes were already on him, girls glancing sideways, curious. At the front, the professor announced the arrival of the final student and urged him to introduce himself. Memories from his past life came rushing back. Timid, embarrassed, mocked. But that was then. Now, with his transformed self, he walked forward and declared his presence with confidence. He gave his name, his fiery hometown, and mentioned the delay due to hospitalization. Girls whispered in awe, while the guys boiled with envy. The teacher praised him, clapping as though welcoming a model student. The whispers grew louder. Girls pressed Ching Ching for her opinion. Then the protagonist, reckless as ever, threw fuel on the fire, inviting any single girls to add him to their contacts, bragging that he was easy to please and easy to entertain. Chaos. The class was stunned. The boys spat insults, calling him arrogant just because of his looks. He only sneered inwardly, mocking them as pathetic losers, while targeting exactly those girls they wanted. He sat down, and instantly a storm gathered around him. Flirty girls swarmed his desk, fighting for attention. One figure cut through the crowd and slammed her palm on the table. Shilu Ting, the class monitor. Crowned the campus goddess 3 years running, she demanded the class fees before adding him to the group. His grin widened. All of this chaos had been just to make her talk to him. In his last life, she had tricked him so badly he nearly dropped out. But not this time. Now he planned to play the role of her close friend, with mischief written all over his face. He teased her shamelessly, asking if she wanted his number for more than just the class group. She glared coldly, clarifying it was only for group business. He laughed it off and asked the fee. She named her price, 200. He paid immediately, casually asking if the group also posted announcements for activities. She said yes, 3 days ahead. Another girl appeared then, slipping in with a hug for her friend before turning to him with a smile. She offered to add him to the group as well, introducing herself as Yu from Jamin. He complimented her name and her charm, but moments later his eyes dropped to his phone, ignoring her completely. Offended, she tried again, curious about his phone brand, something she had never seen. He dismissed it as a cheap piece of junk, asking why she cared. She pressed, confused. He looked rich, so why use such a device? Was it sentimental? His answer was blunt. He was poor. Her face twisted, and she walked away, materialistic to the bone. He remembered clearly, in his previous life she had strung him along, pretending affection just to milk him for gifts. Not again. He rose, done with the nonsense. Some girls nearby prodded him, asking if he thought the class leader was beautiful. He shot back that appearances didn't matter. What counted was inner beauty. Shilu Ting overheard, her expression unreadable. By nightfall, the students headed to the dorms. Someone asked why he wasn't going along. He explained his dorm was downstairs, quicker that way. Moments later, he arrived. His new roommates were inside. One of them spotted him, sneered, and shoved him with a kick, barking for him to get out and stop standing around. But this time, the protagonist wasn't meek. He glared straight at the boy, ordering him off his bed and to move the chair. The roommates smirked, mocking. What if he refused? The protagonist ignored the provocation and climbed to his spot anyway. From his backpack, he pulled out a hammer. The blonde roommate froze, ready to mouth off, until his friend grabbed his arm. A hammer? Who carried something like that around? Only a lunatic. Best not to push this one. The boy lying on the bunk ahead of him turned pale, already imagining a hammer blow crushing his skull in the middle of the night. One by one, the 3 roommates made excuses and slipped out of the dorm, terrified of sharing the room with a potential psychopath. He asked where they were going as they backed out, and they muttered about visiting their girlfriends. His smile twisted dark, almost deranged. Girlfriends, really? He almost laughed, but they bolted before he could say more. Alone again, he wondered if he had pushed them too far. Staring at the system, he questioned whether his growing aggression was the result of rising attributes. If so, then he would have to work even harder to exploit it. By the next day, rumors were already spreading. A green-haired girl whispered about the newcomer, convinced he came from some billionaire family. The blonde guy knew better. He remembered that this so-called rich kid was the one calmly sleeping in the dorm while everyone else suffered. Not far away, a sharp-eyed girl sipped her juice, only to freeze when she caught sight of him. His athletic figure made heads turn as he walked past. A group of girls waved to him from across the way, and one broke from the pack to ask about his dorm situation, curious how he'd secured a room on the top floor. He brushed her off with a short answer. Luck. Nothing more. Meanwhile, the blonde troublemaker lingered with his crew, grumbling about how the new guy had stormed into the dorm and stirred up chaos. Another warned the protagonist to avoid them, but it was already too late. When the blonde laid eyes on him, the cigarette slipped from his fingers in fear. Now it was a standoff, the protagonist with his crowd of milkmaids facing off against a pack of boys. Whispers spread fast. Everyone wanted to know why these 2 groups were locked on each other. The protagonist stayed perfectly calm, but the blonde shook with nerves. The boy with glasses greeted him awkwardly, while the blonde started edging away. Before he could vanish, the protagonist called out, asking if they'd be back that night. The blonde muttered about having to meet his cruel friend again, trying to escape. The girls nearby exchanged confused looks, realizing there was more history here than they understood. But one girl, the one with that dangerous spark in her eyes, understood immediately. The protagonist wasn't treating those boys like equals. He was treating them like dogs. He stepped into the elevator, casually holding the doors as 10 girls crowded in. The boldest one planted herself right in front of him, eyes glittering with mischief. She wanted to play, and her charm hit its mark, even against a man who had already lived one life and carried all the lessons of reincarnation. As the elevator doors slid open, the nervous one tried to latch on to the protagonist, throwing an arm over his shoulder as if they were close. He whispered something about being afraid of himself. The protagonist shoved his hand away, coldly reminding him that they weren't even acquainted, so he had no right to touch him. Shocked by the reaction, the boy stumbled back, muttered an apology, and fled. Moments earlier, he had been boasting about wanting to be friends with everyone. Yet now, he denied it without hesitation. Inside the room, the milkmaid waved him over, patting the spot beside her. The manipulator slid into place as well. As he passed, she fixed her gaze on him, throwing out a line about quality being better than quantity when it came to friendships. She tried to test him, asking if he wanted to make friends. His reply was sharp. Friends didn't change anything. Her companion mocked her, laughing out loud, but the manipulator recovered quickly, straightened, and demanded his phone number. He agreed without much enthusiasm, handing it over but barely responding. The class representative joined in, cutting him with her words. She accused him of ignoring her messages, acting like he didn't care about her at all. He brushed it off with an excuse, saying he had been busy, promising to reply later. She clenched her teeth, annoyed. What was so special about him anyway? Handsome, yes, but arrogant to the bone. Better to stay away. Still, when her attention drifted, he was already bent over his notebook, writing with intensity. His pen raced like a man desperate to put every fragment of thought onto the page. Knowledge he had acquired came rushing in waves, but remembering to use it all in the right way was overwhelming, so he forced himself to organize it. The girl stared, unsettled by his frenzy. Finally, she broke the silence, asking why he was studying so obsessively when the class hadn't even reached that material. He lifted his head, unimpressed, asking if studying alone was forbidden. She shot back, mocking him. If he was so intelligent, why wasn't he in humanities? He smirked and explained it wasn't ability that had held him back before, only lack of drive. That was gone now. He was prepared to rebuild his life from the ground up. The two girls exchanged glances, whispering admiration. One admitted she had always suspected he was a different breed, a genius unlike the rest of the boys. His eyes narrowed at her. He knew her game. In his past life, she toyed with men until she landed a wealthy one, then married and disappeared. She wasn't fooling him this time. Turning to the class president, he asked if she could guess why he studied so aggressively. She tried to piece together his past like a puzzle, imagining him as a reckless troublemaker who had lost his girlfriend to a rich rival, taken a beating, and then finally sworn to bury himself in study so it would never happen again. That, she claimed, was the reason he avoided women. She looked at him after her guess, waiting for confirmation. He laughed, calling her insane, accusing her of writing fan fiction. Embarrassment flushed across her face, and she stayed silent. His curiosity only deepened. Why so timid all of a sudden? A little later, she excused herself, still awkward, leaving him with the nagging thought that maybe she really did write stories. He didn't remember that detail from his past life. All he knew was that she had deceived him miserably before. Yet, beneath that, she had been kind. She was disciplined, hardworking, someone he once believed would succeed after graduation. But life had given her a bad marriage instead. If she was really a writer, that could explain everything. He remembered a moment in the computer lab when he caught a glimpse of her screen, a message asking about a novel update. 2 lives, 2 faces, one as the diligent university girl, the other as a secret author. Now the scoundrel in him wanted to strip away the disguise and expose her real self. Meanwhile, she sat at her desk later that day, pen pressed against her lips, staring blankly at the page. Her mind wasn't on her studies, but on him. She hated it, hated that she couldn't shake him from her thoughts. Every hesitation earlier replayed in her head, and she feared he had noticed more than she wanted him to. Later, the milkmaid asked him to wait so they could go together to the cafeteria. He brushed her off, claiming he had things to do. Her eyes welled up, and she ran to her friend in tears. By night, with no class scheduled for the following day, he planned to buy new gear, a computer and a phone. The problem was clear. He needed cash fast. When he returned to the dorm, the blonde boy stared wide-eyed, expecting another hammer incident. The sound of the backpack hitting the bed sent nerves spiraling through the room. The next day, he swiped his card without hesitation, walking out with a brand new iPhone, a laptop, and a special SIM card. That purchase triggered the gift system again. The reward was extraordinary, a super SIM card. It came with instant, untraceable registration, completely secure, untappable, able to generate numbers instantly from basic information. No credits needed, unlimited calls, unmonitored. Used wisely, it could become a powerful tool in his schemes. In another corner of campus, inside the girls' dorm, the milkmaid was already gossiping. She asked the class president what she thought of him. The answer came cold. There were plenty of rich boys at the university and he wasn't special. Yet her words cracked the moment her phone lit up with a message. It was from him. Using the super SIM, he had already pulled her number and sent a message. "Hello, monitor. It's Han Lai. Don't give my number to anyone." Her friend peeked over, asking casually if she had added him to the college group. She felt a sting of sadness. Earlier, he had told her not to give his number to anyone, yet there he was, inside the group chat like everyone else. The contradiction lingered in her chest. Meanwhile, the protagonist had another mission in mind. He wanted to uncover the secret forum where she published her novels. Hours of searching turned up nothing. Maybe she hadn't created it yet in this timeline. After digging deeper, he finally stumbled upon her username. But when he tried to add her, she had set up a filter. A small questionnaire asking, "Who am I? Who are you? And why do you want to add me?" He typed what he thought would convince her and left it at that. Back in the dorm, the thick babe beckoned him to sit closer again, and whispers spread quickly. The girls teased her for constantly clinging to him. Even he found it strange. She had always been friendly, but not this forward. Casting a glance at the class president, he thought to himself that the bait was already in place. Now it was just a matter of waiting for her to bite. In class, another scene unfolded. The big-haired guy puffed out his chest, bragging that his family owned 4 buildings worth millions. But the protagonist knew the truth. Those buildings were tied to the whole extended family, with profits thinly sliced between them. At best, the guy's family had a handful of houses inside those buildings. Not poor, but nowhere near the wealth he boasted. The class president seemed unimpressed by the braggart. To her, he was nothing more than an empty shell. Plain looks, no personality, just noise. Her eyes drifted back to the protagonist. In her gaze, he was complete. The big-haired guy mocked him for studying so intensely, questioning if he planned to pass the exams. The protagonist replied vaguely, saying he hadn't decided, but appreciated the concern. One of the boys, trying to get laughs, pointed at his own face and swore he'd eat half a kilo of filth from the milkmaid if the protagonist passed. It was a cheap way to reveal his own perversions. The protagonist seized the moment, turning the joke back on him. His sharp remark made the milkmaid flush with embarrassment as she tapped his shoulder nervously, scolding him for mimicking such disgusting behavior. Yet the pink-haired girl laughed, saying she thought it was amusing. The big-haired guy's anger spiked. How was it disgusting when he said it, but funny when the protagonist did? Fuming, he threw down a ridiculous offer. If the protagonist actually passed, he could live rent-free in his house for 3 years. The room went silent, the air thick with the expectation that humiliation had just been delivered. But the protagonist only brushed it off, thanking him and saying he'd think about it. His calm dismissal shattered the tension. Everyone assumed he hadn't understood the insult. In truth, he simply didn't care. The class president, watching closely, praised him. She said his composure and sharp mind were proof of his talent, and after seeing him solve difficult math problems with ease, she was convinced he would pass. The protagonist blinked, baffled. Was the president actually praising him? Since when did this cold girl start talking like that? The big-haired guy wasn't convinced. Skepticism twisted his face as he leaned forward, ready to throw down another challenge. The big-haired boy grew suspicious, snatched the notebook from the desk, and flipped through it. Scribbles filled the page, but none of it made sense to him. Before he could mock it further, a sharp-eyed girl grabbed it next. She skimmed the answers and announced they were all correct, but pointed out the obvious. No formulas, no process, just solutions. Where were the calculations? The protagonist yanked the notebook back, unfazed, and muttered that such basic problems weren't worth writing out. He solved them all in his head. That single line flipped the mood instantly. Instead of ridicule, excitement erupted. Several students crowded him, asking if he would hold a private lesson in their dorms. The attention cut deep into the big-haired boy's pride, and seeing the president herself leaning closer to talk with the protagonist only stoked his fury. Desperate to salvage his image, he puffed his chest and threw out another boast. Maybe, after 10 years of work, the protagonist could afford a small house, or at least scrape together a down payment. If he needed a place to rent, his family supposedly had plenty. The milkmaid's eyes glittered, wondering if Hanley really had money, while the president secretly prayed for him to be crushed. But instead of being cornered, the protagonist laughed right in the braggart's face. He demanded to know what kind of luxurious homes this so-called rich boy thought his family owned. The boy fired back, claiming every property was high class. That was his mistake. The protagonist cut through the lie with precision. He laid out the details. Building number 4 in Yangpu district. Small, elevator, 4 apartments per floor. Over 3 generations, the family had scraped together 8 units. They lived in 2, rented out the rest, and split the profits. It wasn't nothing, but it was far from luxury. He sneered, reminding everyone that acting superior over 3 generations worth of pooled effort was laughable. The class buzzed with whispers, the big-haired boy red-faced and scrambling for words. Then the teacher entered, snapping the room into silence. The wicked beauty at the back leaned on her desk, twirling her pen, eyes locked on the protagonist. In her head, she was already outlining a new novel about a domineering CEO, using him as the model. She could barely keep herself from staring the entire class. When the bell rang, the milkmaid cornered him again, insisting he come along to the cafeteria. He refused, claiming the food there was too expensive. Just then, his phone buzzed, the gleam of his brand new device impossible to hide. She snapped, calling him out for lying. He calmly explained that the phone was exactly why he couldn't spend on snacks. He was broke now. Her temper boiled, and she declared she would pay. He warned he wouldn't be giving the money back. She said she didn't care and grabbed him by the wrist, dragging him along. He let out a crooked grin. If it came to living off others, he had no shame in admitting. He was good at it. Laughter rippled around him when he shrugged at the idea of freeloading. One girl pinched his arm, suspicious of his claim, while he brushed it off with a casual excuse about preferring cheap cafeterias. Her face tightened. She feared he was calling her a gold digger. A green-haired classmate quickly stepped in, offering to pay and smoothing things over, which only made the protagonist note how eager they both seemed to win his favor. Money and romance tangled in his head. The green-haired girl wanted pure, simple love and dreamed of marrying soon, so she was out. The girl on the other side wanted a rich husband, so she wasn't a match either. For now, he decided to take it easy. The short-haired girl assumed he must be loaded to act so uninterested around pretty women. If his family really had cash, she planned to snag him. Before she could scheme further, the green-haired girl offered to pay for his new skincare haul. An awkward boast, since the products had actually come from a secret admirer. Still, the girls fired off questions, curious and loud. Why the new phone, any past relationships, what kind of woman he liked. The boys around snickered and called him lucky. He answered simply, beauty wasn't everything. Kindness, shared values, and being a decent person mattered most. The group labeled him old-fashioned and picky. The milkmaid thought only of looks and curves. The green-haired girl calculated how to win him. The class president stayed cool and kept her distance, not wanting to be dragged into petty comparisons. Later, at the cafeteria, he showed up with a cake. Expensive, attention-grabbing. The girls swooned. He pushed the largest strawberry slice toward the president, knowing her favorite flavor. The gesture hit a nerve. She remembered him as her old simp, and the sight of him now made her scheme bitterly about getting even for past slights. The other girls clustered around him, chasing his attention like moths. Time moved on. The protagonist hit the grind. Exercise, study, careful planning, repeat. His steady focus and sudden rise made him an odd celebrity in the dorm. Rumors and admiration trailed him, some of it sincere, most of it opportunistic. But he kept building, one small victory at a time. Surrounded by thick-bodied girls, the protagonist caught sight of a message in the college group about a trip to the zoo. His popularity was only climbing. Not long after, a private note from the president appeared. Tomorrow's safari park trip was already covered. She'd paid for him herself. It was her first time spending money on a man, and the irritation behind her gesture wasn't lost on him. He thought of Little Cucumber, her online pen name, and the site where she published her work. For weeks, he had been funding her as an anonymous supporter, and now a thank you message finally arrived. She admitted she was touched. He smiled, seeing the trap closing. To be sure of her identity, he pressed with careful questions about group chats, future works, and contact numbers. Her answers gave him the confirmation he wanted. The next day began with the safari trip. At the subway station, the girls swarmed him with greetings. The president arrived, playing the part of the cute benefactor, ready to buy tickets for everyone. The guys ogled her legs, but in his eyes, they were only thin sticks. In his memory of another life, he knew she would later become thicker, sculpted by gym hours. That thought made him smirk, already picturing her future figure. As the group moved, one girl hooked herself to his arm, then another clung on the other side. In his last life, they had ignored him, yet now they crowded him like he was a prize. Uninterested in silly romance games, he ducked out, pretending to head for the bathroom. By the time the others reached the safari, he had vanished, ignoring the stream of messages demanding his location. The president boiled in silence, irritated that he'd run off without a word. Then a message came from him, asking for help. She almost ignored it, but curiosity made her read on. He claimed to be stuck in the men's bathroom without toilet paper. She sneered, savoring his embarrassment, and demanded he beg properly before she'd help. He tossed out half-hearted honorifics. "Mommy, madam, dear," testing her patience. Her anger spiked, swearing heaven itself had cursed her with this nuisance. But before frustration could settle, he appeared in person, smiling with a giant ice cream in hand. The move was calculated. Make her irritated, then give her a surprise. A love story needed contrast, tension, emotional spikes. He was using strategy now, and his system rewarded him for it. He shoved the ice cream at her, saying he had to rush back to the bathroom. She snapped back, embarrassed, telling him to leave, but he only found her red face amusing. Threatening to force-feed her the treat if she didn't accept it, he teased her until laughter broke through. She giggled, side-glancing, knowing she was giving in. She couldn't deny a flicker of warmth toward him, and the system confirmed it. Flirting skill acquired. Han Li burned 180,000 points to upgrade it instantly, boosting his persuasion and charm. They played with the ice cream until a child bumped into her, sending her tumbling into his chest. Embarrassed, she pulled away, but soon settled right back beside him, talking as if nothing had happened. The short-haired friend spotted them from a distance, eyes narrowing. On the bench, the president's thoughts spiraled. Now she understood why he hadn't answered her messages. He was with another girl. But the fanfic writer came running over, clinging to her friend in a scene so romantic it looked scripted. Han Li, amused, found himself enjoying the spectacle. Later, down Snack Street, the big friend threw on a pair of rabbit ears, fishing for approval. He gave it, then asked where the other two had gone. She explained they were shopping, and she had stayed behind so he wouldn't be left alone. Without hesitation, she hooked her arm through his, dragging him along for fun. They wandered into the park until a necklace on display caught her eye. Han Li's memory burned. He had once saved for weeks to buy her that exact necklace in his past life, only for her to hate it and never wear it. Yet here she stood, feigning delight, pretending she adored it. The irony made him laugh. Without hesitation, he told the clerk to wrap it up as a gift. Inwardly, he declared this would be the last simp gift of his life. After this moment, the game would change. She glowed with happiness at receiving it, eager to show her friends, but he stopped her, warning it could stir conflict. When the purchase went through, the system rewarded him with a strange item, a pet collar that granted obedience and happiness. He smirked. Perfect if he were raising a husky, but hardly fitting for the moment. Yet when she begged him to put it around her neck, he complied. She beamed proudly, oblivious to the stares outside. The president, watching from a distance, felt cast aside. Han Li noticed her mood shift. He almost blamed himself, but then caught the thought, why should he? He cared far more for her online persona than her offline self. Approaching lightly, he asked how she was doing. The green-haired girl explained they were about to leave but had seen him caught up. With that, the park outing ended, and he returned home. Back in his own space, Han Li lit up. Online, the president answered him again, and here he thrived, the king of 2D. He asked about her next book. She confessed it would be delayed. Frustration weighed on her. Her recent writing felt weak, her results unsatisfying. With his sharpened writing skills, he offered clear criticism. Her style was amateurish, her character logic shaky, her development uneven. The words landed like a mirror. She admitted he was right, stunned that someone had read so carefully. For the first time, she thanked him sincerely. She had asked for more precise feedback, and Han Li delivered without hesitation. Confidence surged through him as he declared himself an expert in this life. He sent her long notes, packed with corrections and tips. To her, the amount felt overwhelming, Yet everything he said hit the mark. He was right about her weak spots, right about the flaws in her characters and logic. She was impressed while he was already plotting. Cooperation with her meant the first steps toward his revenge plan. The two spent almost the entire night exchanging messages, dissecting her writing, polishing ideas. Eventually, he suggested something new. A story he had always wanted to create, centered on a domineering CEO and his wife entangled in an intense romance. Of course, he only proposed it because he knew it matched her favorite genre. He detailed the concept and asked if she would join him in writing it. She hesitated, but agreed, and with that, the collaboration began. The next day advanced the game further. They met at the bookstore, though she still carried irritation over the necklace incident. Ironically, she went to her phone to vent to him, unaware she was venting to the very man sitting across from her. Days blurred together as he poured time into their joint project, writing all day, guiding her all night. A few days later, he was eating distractedly, his eyes locked on her drafts on his phone, when a new figure entered the scene. A bald friend introduced her, the famed beauty from international studies. She radiated elegance, and his partner urged him to join them. At the table, chatter filled the air. The bald one hyped her up as Paige, the most beautiful, most popular woman in the entire university. Han Lee, cornered, listened as his own reputation was exposed. Whispers spread. He was the guy constantly shadowed by two beautiful girls, the one they competed to feed. He grimaced. Fame was becoming a curse, and even his friends begged him to teach them how to copy his success. Meanwhile, Paige encouraged everyone to eat. Han Lee studied her carefully. In his past life, he'd only glimpsed her from a distance. Now he realized she was in the same class as his dorm mate. Rich, powerful, yet strangely down to earth, she shattered the rumors about her arrogance. She admitted she couldn't handle much alcohol but would try. He noticed her unusual eyes, which she explained were inherited from her foreign mother. He praised them silently as extraordinary, and their talk carried on smoothly. Then a nudge from his friend shifted the atmosphere. The president was nearby, and she had already spotted him. Sparks flew. The most desired woman in human relations against the top star of finance. Two forces clashing silently across the table. The president's attention locked on him, demanding to know why he sat with Paige, demanding why he hadn't sent her a message. He dismissed it lightly, explaining he was with dorm mates, nothing more. But when his friend carelessly called for another chair, inviting her over, Han Lee's cold stare nearly cut him down. She sat anyway. He pushed back, pointing at the scraps left on the table, suggesting she order food to go. The implication was clear. Leave. The president understood the sting. She stood, masking her hurt, and left without protest. He didn't flinch. Yet the moment she was gone, his double life stirred. From the bathroom on his secret account, he reached out to her, asking if she was fine. She vented to him there, confessing that her classmate had ignored her, refused her seat, treated her warmly at times and coldly at others. He replied that it was simply a hot and cold game, deliberate teasing. She accepted the explanation, convincing herself not to care anymore, vowing to stop looking back. Han Lee returned to the table, dropped his wallet down, and ordered his friend to settle the bill. Then he left. Outside, the president stood in line, still texting furiously about her frustration and craving fried rice. At that exact moment, Han Lee appeared in front of her, fried rice already in his hands,